Hey, welcome back to my channel. I've noticed that I've been going down kind of a rabbit hole about realistic science fiction, and I'm going to go ahead and continue with that because it's pretty interesting. The latest book I wrote, Praetorian Discordia, which I mentioned, I'll just put a link in the description if you guys want to look at it. It's kind of my first foray into science fiction, the whole Regnum Humanitas universe. And what I've noticed with it is that a lot of the stuff that is written um, is a lot more artistic than realistic. And again, that's fine. It depends on what the point of your story is. Um, and I think that's the thing that really struck me recently was the whole idea of spaceships and spaceship design in science fiction. Um, it centers around a specific question. Why are spaceships, the vast majority of them in science fiction, streamlined? Why are they aerodynamic? Because when you think about it, if they're in space, there's really no reason for them to be aerodynamic, correct? Um, with a caveat, which I'll get into a little later. But also, when you look at them, there's certain like key design elements, which when you start thinking about like what we're going to be doing in space if we ever get up there, don't make a lot of sense. Again, you have to put it in context. And the main one that I was thinking about is why do we have like the large thrusters on one end? And then, again, I want to use the Expanse as an example of this. And I don't want to be busting on the Expanse because it's awesome. It's my favorite sci-fi show. But even there, they have the main thrusters at the back of the ship and then smaller thrusters around there. And when I was thinking about that, it actually makes sense in the Expanse's context because I mean you want acceleration in some of your warships and things like that, and it makes sense to do it that way. But more on that a little later. It's just an example of kind of these elements that tend to crop up regularly in science fiction. And I think the reason for that is very simple. And I'm going to go ahead and just demonstrate really quickly for you guys. I'm going to go ahead and take uh, the opening scene from Star Wars. Just put it on my screen. So when we look at the screen, anybody that's seen, episode 4 or the actual chronologically first Star Wars that ever was made knows this opening scene. And a big part of that is just that kind of big, brutal, wedge-shaped Star Destroyer that's in the back. And it sets a really strong tone for the movie, right? Now, I want you to imagine what that opening scene would look like if instead of the Star Destroyer, or what it would feel like, what kind of message it would give, if instead of the Star Destroyer, the opening ship was this. Another iconic spaceship. This is the Borg cube. Now, if you imagine it, this is giving a whole nother vibe to that opening scene than the Star Destroyer, right? Now, again, I'm not busting on the Borg cube, but it very much gives a different kind of feeling when you're seeing it, especially on the big screen, um, if it's designed like this. And that, I think, is the core reason why we still have streamlined spaceships and how they, and how they're designed, how Hollywood and science fiction and fiction writers and producers and script writers design it the way they do. It's because it's designed to make a visual statement and not necessarily be something that's quote unquote accurate, um, as far as physics and the science goes. And that's fine. I mean, it's supposed to be entertaining, right? And so if you want something to make a visual statement, that's how you're going to do it. But it even goes within the same series. And I think probably the best one, the example I like to use is Star Trek. Because if you look at earlier, that I watched Star Trek, but I'm not a huge, I'm not like I haven't memorized the lore or anything. But this is an earlier version of the Enterprise. I think it was the one that came out after in some of the movies after the original series when they were starting to do a reboot. And again, it's very kind of visually appealing. It's got an aesthetic sense to it, and it's making a statement um, that it's maybe a little more aggressive and a little more, um, like we can handle our business than the standard kind of dorky looking Enterprise that showed up in the original series, which again was great, but it was kind of like if a hippie designed a spaceship, which is essentially what Roddenberry was and did. So this is kind of an update on making it a little meaner. Um, but even that, when you get into the next generation ship, again, this is giving a whole different vibe. I mean, it's still kind of mean, but it's still very aesthetically, it's a lot more artistic, I would think. So all this to say that, the reason that, the primary reason that we see spaceships in science fiction designed the way they are is for aesthetics and as ways to use that aesthetic design to kind of reinforce the message or that the writers are trying to get across, or just to entertain. Um, you know, um, and I think and that's fine. That's good, and it's worked very well. I mean, we've got some very beautiful spaceships out of it. But I would like to propose that we start moving maybe beyond that. And the first thing is instead of looking at having the spaceships kind of drive the story in a lot of ways, look at the story itself and have the spaceships just sort of how they fit into that universe that you're trying to create scientifically, with the physics and all that. Um, and again, I think it's very, it's human nature to kind of, everybody loves the Enterprise. It's iconic. And it's a good example of how we start the story in a lot of ways starts centering around the ship, which is it's a good way to do it. But if you want to get beyond that kind of framework, that story framework, I would strongly urge you to start thinking about how you design your spaceships. And the first thing is that not all spaceships are the same. They've got different things that they're supposed to do. And whatever their specific job is actually going to determine how you build the hull, which is kind of a no-brainer, right? We all know that. We don't make submarines the same way that we make cargo ships. So think about this. If you're going to design a cargo ship, and this is what I did in the Regnum Humanitas universe, think about the economics behind moving things from various planets and settlements, and I'm just talking about within the solar system. And then say, how are you, if you were a money-grubbing capitalist, how would you design a spaceship to maximize your profit and minimize, the engineering issues that would inevitably arise when you're doing sort of space travel, and kind of use that as the central framework when you're designing your ship. So I'm going to give you an example of what I did here. The first thing is that I realized is that space, even though it is largely empty, is not totally empty. I mean, you still got to worry about things like, debris, dust particles, et cetera, et cetera. Just look at near Earth orbit and just all the little, the problems they get with that, even if they're very, very small particles. If you hit one, I mean, it could do some damage. So I was thinking, you could get around that with, kind of messing with it, like, oh, I'm going to create a gravity bow wave, which some science things do, and that works. That's fine. But I didn't want to do that, so I went with a low tech solution where I was going to say, well, they've got dust shields, and essentially what that is it's a shield that they put on the front of the ship to absorb the impacts of any particles that they might run into. And it's going to be sloped because if anybody knows anything about tank armor, if you put a slope on it, it's actually you get more bang for your buck as far as deflection of debris if you do it that way. But it's low tech, so it's going to be not made of metal. I think I went with like a plasteel, which is a lightweight metal in my universe, foam composite. So it's relatively light and it can deflect a lot of the smaller debris particles, or at least absorb the hits so that you're not having those running into and damaging your cargo. So that's on the front of the ship. Behind it, I just basically put a girder, just like a metal girder or a series of them. And this provided the attachment points for the cargo containers. Because when you think about it, we already do this with container ships. There's really no reason to design an entire ship around, with the enclosed hull and cargo and all that, when you can basically just have a cargo container and detach it when you get to your destination, and then get the new ones on there, just hook them in, and you're good to go. So it's ugly as hell, at least when I'm visualizing it, because it's just a metal frame that you've got like cargo containers stuck to. And this brings me to my next point: acceleration and deceleration. Um, that would take fuel. If you want to speed up a ship or if you want to slow down a ship, that takes fuel. And fuel is weight. If you've got more weight, that's going to be more money that's more cargo capacity you can't spend on actual cargo, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to minimize the amount of time that you spend accelerating and decelerating. The way I got around that was with basically never decelerating these massive container ships or these massive cargo ships in my system. Essentially, what you do is you get them into a stable orbit between, say, Luna, which is a major player, and the Jovian system. And then you just accelerate it up with detachable rockets. You accelerate the whole thing up, and then you just kind of leave it in that stable orbit, and it just goes around and around and around and around. And it constantly is just, it's like a conveyor belt of trade between these two systems. Now, the downside is obviously, you don't have a lot of, you can't, it takes a lot to change the orbital dynamics to say if you want to go to Titan, which is another major settlement. But if you've got a couple of these big cargo ships in this sort of stable orbits between these two major systems, in this case, Jupiter and the moon, that could pretty much handle the trade that you need between them, and for a pretty cost-effective way of doing it. Now, this isn't to say that you don't have engines on these things, because you're going to constantly need to do minute adjustments, to keep these orbital things stable. Or if you see a large piece of debris that you can't get around, to avoid it. So the way I got around that was, instead of having a dedicated engineering section at the back of the ship, what I did is, in the middle of this grid, basically I put in a detachable crew/engine module. And what this is where you would put the crew in cryogenic suspension, and the engine thrusters and the computers and all those sorts of things that you would need to actually have the ship be functional. And it's detachable. So if you do need to do maintenance in it, all you have to do is detach it when you get to the system where you want to do maintenance, get a fresh section that you've been working on, dry dock in the system, plug it back in, the ship continues on its way. And there's no downtime as far as having to do engine maintenance or anything like that. And these were the most complicated systems on the ship, so these are the ones that are actually going to require some sort of maintenance. And you don't want to spend any more time than you have to do that, because time is money, as you know. So the other thing with this thing is, so where are the thrusters? And I thought it would make more sense. So instead of just having one big one at the back and then some smaller ones, kind of scattered around, is to basically put what I call outriggers in 4 directions, from this central module, or maybe even just the top and bottom. I think I actually just went top and bottom. So you've got the fusion reactor and the fuel in this center of this crew/engineering module. And then at the end of these outriggers, you've got the thrusters. And these thrusters are basically going every direction. One left, one right, one up, one forward, one back, at the bare minimum. And so what you would do is you keep these outriggers behind, again, that front dust shield, because you don't want it to be damaged by any sort of debris. And if you have that option, you actually have a fairly, and just vector your thrust, through whichever, however you want to do it. You've actually got a fairly nimble ship for as large as it is, and well within the capabilities of, making minute orbital adjustments just to keep on track. Downside is you can't do high, because these outriggers do have some sort of strain. If you do high thrust maneuvers, it's a lot of strain on these outriggers, which you wouldn't get if you just had the engine stuck in the back. But again, these ships aren't designed to do high thrust things. They're designed to be kind of slow and steady as they just kind of continuously orbit between these colonies, providing, goods to trade. It's the most cost effective. Honestly, we could do it now if we wanted to, I think. The engineering with fusion especially isn't quite there yet, but it's something to consider. So I want you to imagine this container ship, or this massive cargo ship, on its voyage. It's a giant metal frame. It's got a sloped, not a huge slope, but maybe like something analogous to a heat shield on like one of the Apollo ships when it comes back down on the front. It's a giant metal frame, basically stretching behind it. And this frame is just studded with attachments points all along it, which is basically full of cargo containers. I mean, almost similar to what we have today. In the middle of this frame is basically the crew and engineering module, which, I mean, you could make it however you want. But it's attached in there. It's basically plugged into whatever electrical and control systems are on this metal framework. It's got a sensor package sticking a little ways out behind the dust shield, maybe top, bottom, left, right. And then it's got these outriggers, which is where the engine thrust is going, so that it gives it some maneuverability. In my universe, pirates would love these things because they know exactly where they are. So they bolted on a couple anti-piracy defenses, which are essentially just Gatling turrets, and you just stick them wherever you want to. Bolt them in. Again, these turrets are self-contained. They've got their own ammunition magazine. You just plug them into the power network of the ship, and you're good to go. And then you've got the crew in cryogenic suspension in that middle module, and you wake them up when there's anything that the computer can't handle. So when it gets to its destination, it basically ejects these cargo containers. Now, each container would have to have, in my world, I said they had limited deceleration, basically just a simple rocket that's stuck on the front, so they get ejected, they decelerate at a certain navigational point, and that's where you've got the tugs, the Jovian tugs in this case, that they're basically just these very simple ships with manipulating grapples, and on one end, a very limited maneuvering, and they collect all these cargo containers, and the cargo containers are basically all clumped by whatever their final destination is. So all the cargo containers that are going to Europa, for example, would be in one clump. So you just basically eject the clump, get a couple of tugs out there to get that clump, and then they in system they send it to Europa, and vice versa. So, but you could actually detach them individually too if you needed to. If there was, like, say, one research base on like Io or whatever that needed just one container, you could do that. So then all the containers are off. So the ship is going around. If there's any sort of maintenance, if you need to swap out the crew compartments, crew and engineering module, you could do that. And then when it gets to another section, this is going to be where all the cargo containers for Luna are basically sitting, and they're already gotten up to match velocity with the container ship. So then the tugs move all these cargo containers in. They attach them to the container ship. Container ship makes any sort of minor course adjustments, and it's on its way. And it goes around and around and around constantly. And depending on how many you have in this, how many container ships you have in this orbital loop, they could show up every month, every week if you wanted to, but again, the fact is it's minimal time in and refuel. You basically add refueling tanks if you need to as well there. So it's a very cost-effective system, but it's ugly looking as hell. I get that. Aesthetically, if I was to put this out there, I can't even get Firefly to put something out that looks even like it because it keeps trying to make it all streamlined. But it's an example of this kind of brutal, ugly system that actually is very profitable and meets the trading needs of these two systems. So why would you need streamlined ships? We covered it a little bit with the dust shield, but I think when you start talking about warships, it's a whole nother ball of wax. And I'm going to do another episode devoted entirely to creating, quote unquote, my thoughts on creating, quote unquote, realistic warships. But I've got the civilian stuff here. So if you have any comments or ideas on it, feel free to put them in the comments section. And yeah, food for thought. Think about it if you're writing science fiction, maybe including that sort of that ugly practical, cost benefit analysis look on a ship, because that gives a message too, and it could help your story, give it a little bit of depth. All right, thank you.